Hey everyone, and welcome to another Risky Business product demo. My name's Patrick Gray. The idea with these product demos is we get one of our sponsors onto the show, onto a video to do a bit of a show and tell, to show us what their products do, how they work, so on and so forth. And today I'm joined by Abhishek Agrawal, who is the co-founder and chief executive of Material Security. Now, Material Security started off as an email security company with a bit of a difference. The idea was, instead of just focusing on inbound malware, business email compromise, phishing, stuff like that, they really built a tool set that allowed you some control in a post-compromise situation. So you could redact sensitive information from inboxes, gate sensitive information behind MFA challenges, things like that. But these days, they've pushed the product more and more in the direction of being a comprehensive security suite for O365 or M365 and Google Workspace. And to explain what that all means, Abhishek is joining me now to do that. And Abhishek, how did I do at the intro there? You probably want to give us a more complete description of what Material Security actually does.
No, I think you did great, Pat. Honestly, that's exactly spot on. We started the company with a very specific focus on email, and specifically all of the data that email houses and the fact that it can be leveraged for identity, and how to handle those scenarios. Over time, what we realized is a lot of the things that we were doing with email, our customers brought up that they actually applied to the productivity suite more broadly. And when I think about things like M365 or Google Workspace, which are applications that pretty much every single company in the world uses, it's where all of their data is housed. They really kind of represent critical infrastructure for those companies. And the mission of the company at Material has become to really become a dedicated security platform for those. So we're super focused on that. We definitely still have a very strong email bend because that's our roots and that's where a lot of our customers still use us primarily for. But as you mentioned, over the last couple of years, we've been broadening to the rest of the productivity suite.
All right. Well, why don't you start off? Do you want to start off with the demo? Or you want to walk us through a couple of slides? How do you want to kick this thing off?
I will just do one slide just to show how we actually connect to M365 and Google Workspace, because I think it's really important that viewers understand that, especially those that might be familiar with more legacy email security where things are inline or you have to change DNS. So Material connects entirely via APIs, and it runs out of a single tenant instance. So we connect via APIs, we get access to things like audit log data, settings data, and then of course also file and email content. And then what we are doing with that data is basically running a bunch of different types of detection and response workflows. The important part being that they all run out of a single tenant cloud hosted instance. So every single one of our customers gets their own private isolated instance that Material runs out of. This is super, super, super important because the type of access we have means that we really want to have strict privacy and isolation guarantees for our customers. So deployment is very, very easy. It's entirely API based, and you can connect as many Google Workspace or M365 tenants to the same Material instance as you want. So we have customers that, they have a primary environment in M365, but they might acquire companies that have a Google Workspace presence, and now all of a sudden they can enroll those to the same instance of Material. So that's really the only slide I wanted to show. Pretty, important deployment model from a privacy perspective.
Thank you for not choosing to destroy us, destroy our souls with death by PowerPoint. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. All right, so let's jump right into the product. So at its core, what Material really is you can think of it as a detection and response toolkit that is specifically designed for Google Workspace or M365. And so when you first land into the Material admin console, which I'm showing here, you'll notice that we have a large set of detections that span a bunch of different types of risk areas. So everything from baseline configuration to data governance to obviously email security, because where we got started, to things like identity. And as you might be familiar with in other products, these detections have different severities. And when they actually find something, they create what we call issues. So I can kind of click into any one of these detections, like let's go to this one, something as simple as just checking whether an account has MFA configured. That's what this detection looks for. If it finds things where that test fails, it's going to create issues. Now, This is actually a very, very simple example because it's obviously data that is available via the API. But what we hear from customers all the time is that often even simple questions like this one are hard to glean because you can have different setups. You may need to stitch together different APIs. In the Microsoft world, you might have to run PowerShell scripts. And so Material tries to automate a lot of those things and get this data in a way that it's easy to investigate. When detections create issues, you can go and click into the issue. We'll show you really everything about it that we know. So, things like the raw API response that's leading us to believe whatever we believe. And also, where appropriate, we will suggest a response. Now, often this response is something that you can just do via our platform directly because the underlying APIs let us remediate the problem. And then if not, we'll at least point you to the right documentation where you can find out more information. So, we have a lot of these detections. I'm going to just walk through a couple other examples to start giving you a feel for the types of risks we look for. This is another one that is pretty important, so something like an account that's automatically forwarding email. Now, that on its own might not be that bad, but why are they doing it to a free mail domain? That doesn't really make sense. There's not really a business justification for that. And at least this one is just a subset. But, if they were sending all emails to a free mail domain, well, that's even worse. And so we have detections for these different types of scenarios, and we try to use different bits of context to increase the severity if something is, much worse. Another example here, one that I really like because we've seen this in the wild be abused a lot. You have a Google group, it's got VIP members. It also has weak moderation settings because that's the default. And it allows external senders on the internet to post to it. So think your support or help mailing list. Well, it turns out this is a fantastic way to basically spearfish your VIPs. And it's often something that most security teams miss because to understand these three pieces of information together for a single Google group, you would literally have to query, I think, 3 different APIs on the Google side. So again, all possible, just kind of annoying and tedious to do with the APIs.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen another product that's more Google focused where they've got a feature where they will tell you something like you touched on earlier, which is, this account lacks MFA, which again, you could get it from the Google admin console, but it's buried 18 layers deep and it's really confusing. I mean, we're a workspace shop as well, and just navigating that thing is, it's a real mess. I also believe that with these groups, Google doesn't apply the same level of filtering to inbound mail to those groups as it does to other mail, right? Like that's something you've told me on a previous occasion.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We actually did some research at Material, our security team, where we discovered that, you could send the same exact messages, but they would be blocked for individual accounts and let through for Google groups because Google applies less strict filtering for those. So this tends to be a very common way that, you can phish someone or send them malicious mail. Ask me sometime about Twitter accounts because they're always linked to a mailing list like social ad or marketing ad. And because they're a Google group or a Microsoft mailing list, you can basically try to phish them and you're going to reach a large audience because there's probably many people on that list. It's a very common way to hijack Twitter accounts. Speaking of recon, all of these detections map to the MITRE framework. So we also kind of tell you, the different tactics or objectives that they map to. I'll give maybe just one other quick example of a built-in detection that is very popular. This one uses context from a third party like Okta, and we're looking for files that are shared externally by an account that has already been offboarded in Okta. It's a very common kind of cleanup scenario that many of us have had to deal with. Material will just look for these automatically, and where it gets really cool is that if you've set up auto remediation, we'll not just create these issues, we're actually going to go resolve them. So we will go automatically revoke that external access. You can configure it in a variety of ways. And so these issues will get created, but they also get resolved. So, unlike kind of maybe other CSPM or EDR tools that people might be familiar with, we're really trying to not just create a bunch of tickets for you, but actually resolve the ones that we can via API automatically. So again, being able to use third-party context and marry it with something that we can get from Google or Microsoft in order to find common scenarios. Where it gets really, really fun is that these detections that I've been showing so far are all built-in detections by Material. but you can actually create detections on your own as well as an admin. So let me show a quick example of that. So if I go down and filter here in this demo, I'll find this one, which is a detection looking for files that were shared with the team at mailing list and also have sensitive content inside them. Now, again, material in this case is doing the sensitive content indexing and detection for you. And then you get to just write a simple query like shared with group and category.any, meaning any sensitive content category, to create your own detection. And obviously, just like our built-in detections, you can leverage the remediation options that we provide. So in this case, someone is sending an email notification first to let the file owner know that this is not a great idea, giving them 7 days to self-remediate. After that, just doing it for them is something that you could do over here. So that's how these kind of detections and response workflows work. The key points are there are built-in ones, there are ones you can create on your own, and unlike a lot of other posture management tools, you're actually remediating things, not just creating issues that then have to be manually investigated. I want to show how you kind of create these custom detections, because that's another really important part of the product. So if I go over here and switch over to what we call an Explorer view, we basically are indexing all of the message content and all of the file content into a single tenant data warehouse, like I was mentioning at the beginning of the call, and we give you really powerful search over it. So, for example, simple things like being able to search on subject and then combine them with other unique things that I might know about, about the account or things like that, are things that I can very, very quickly search on. And that applies to messages, but it also applies to files. This search is across as many tenants as I want. If I have the right permissions, it can query just the metadata or the content, depending on the role I have in the console. But the fun part is that if I go and create a search query here, so let's look for example, driver's licenses that live inside a shared drive that are also shared with a personal email address, just as an example. I can just go not only search really quickly for this, which it completes in kind of seconds, because again, it's being powered by this data warehouse, but I can also save it down as a new detection of my own. And that's what leads me to be able to have these kind of custom detections that are married to the built-in detections. And again, this applies to files. It can also be done for messages, for things like sensitive messages or malicious messages.
And so when you save that as a new detection, does that just apply then to new content, or does it periodically run as a search through your entire corpus of information? Like, how does the actual mechanic of the detection work there? The mechanics of it.
Yeah, that's a great question. It will apply iteratively, so it will start applying immediately to any new content that we sync, and we're doing it in real time. So it's not like a periodic sync. We are using the APIs to listen for any changes in events in the underlying,
and then it will take that new content and throw it into your detection queue, basically.
That's correct. That's correct. And now when you do create a detection, you do have the option of also asking us to go and historically look across the corpus we already have, if you want to backfill the detection, which you may or may not want to do depending on what you're trying to create. But yeah, it's all real time, because all of material works by listening to update events that are being emitted by Microsoft or Google in the first place. So far, a lot of what I've been talking about with these detections is really at the end of the day about hygiene or vulnerabilities, things that can be abused, right? So there's a sensitive file exposed to the internet. There's someone who doesn't have MFA, or there's someone who has auto forwarding, which is not great hygiene. Obviously, vulnerability management is just one part of the problem. We also care a lot about threat detection. And so in the realm of threat detection, one of the things I wanted to show, which we and many other companies do, is just traditional kind of inbound email security. Because in the productivity suite context, a lot of attacks do originate from malicious emails. And Material, like, again, many other products out there, has an inbound email security engine where we are looking for malicious emails that bypass Google, they bypass Microsoft, they bypass a secure email gateway that might be in place. What we do with those is very, very similar. We create issues when we find those types of messages, and we can auto remediate them. So I just want to show you an example of this because it sort of explains how we tie together the different things that we do. So, first off, there's a lot of different types of objectives and tactics that we look for. These are using a variety of techniques, simple heuristics that we've developed over time, open source detections, machine learning models that look for certain types of language. And what we do is whenever we find something malicious, we create these issues or cases, we call them, for malicious emails, and we map them to these different objectives. So let's look at one of these. Just like I was looking at issues before, this is an issue where we've actually found a malicious message. So, in this particular case, this is a brand impersonation of a Wells Fargo bank. And the objective of this email that we've determined is a credential theft. Where it gets really, really interesting is, first of all, as an analyst, I can go and check this out. I can understand kind of, the links. We'll go find similar messages across the organization. If there were any others that we didn't originally catch, we can go and do that investigation. We can apply a whole bunch of different types of auto remediations. One of the more popular ones amongst our customers is something called speed bumping, where we can actually leave a modified copy of the email in the mailbox where the payload is removed, but the message is otherwise left there. And when you try to detonate the payload, instead of just blocking users, which can be kind of annoying for false positives, we speed bump it, meaning we give them an interstitial that they have to pass before they can access the content, which is very effective at finding this middle ground where you're not, quarantining or deleting legitimate emails by mistake, but you're also not accepting this risk of just letting the users detonate whatever they want. So we have a lot of...
Sorry, I just want to jump in there. What's the sort of message that you give them? Because we know users have a habit of clicking through things. Like you'll show them a message that says, if you click OK, you're going to die. And they'll still click OK, right? So how is that working, right? I'm surprised that works. Like what sort of message are you actually throwing in front of the user that's altering their behavior there and their propensity to just click it anyway?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I honestly originally was surprised the same way that you are, because again, like you said, if you kind of overdo this, people get alert fatigue as users and they will just click through any banners. So the first thing is that you're not doing this to all messages. A lot of the old school secure email gateways would literally wrap every single link. And that just
and every time like in an Office document or whatever you want to run a controller, macro or whatever, it's going to throw you a warning. I get what you're saying.
Remember, it's very rare. It's very rare.
I mean, this is going to throw you warnings on stuff that kind of already looks borderline to begin with, right?
Exactly. And then the second thing we've realized over time is that users are in kind of like the type 1 or type 2 system of thought in any given time, right? There's like actually some great research over at Stripe security team a few years ago that basically talked about how it doesn't matter like how sophisticated a user you are. You could phish me if you caught me at the wrong time. Like if I was like dropping off my kids and running late and like at the same time, like, had an errand that like was really important, you could phish me at that time. And the reason is because I'm in this like frame of mind that is just about task completion. And if you get me out of that and just cause me to think even for a minute, it actually can make a dramatic difference. So, and this has been proven out in our data, by the way, because what we do is for all of these messages, we have a classification. We know if it's a true positive or a false positive, because even if we thought something was bad and we were wrong, admins can change this classification and tell us, no, this was a false positive. So over time, we've collected data on how often do users actually go past the speed bump on a true positive message. And it's extremely rare, extremely rare. Now, having said that, it can happen. And so going back to these detection frameworks, of course, we have a detection that is exactly about that. So every time someone does pass through a speed bump, you get an alert. You can put that into a SIM. You can do further investigation. But it is fairly rare in our experience.
Well, and as long as you're flagging that as well, like, and you're actually set up to do something meaningful in those cases, then I can understand why this makes less work for admins.
That's exactly right. So this is, kind of vanilla credential theft. It happens all the time. Many of them are very easy to detect. Some are very difficult to detect. Where this gets really interesting and material is that, remember, inbound detection is just one part of what Material does. And really our focus has always been on what is the actual point of the attack? Okay, so they're doing credential theft. Why? Well, in order to get access to the account. Okay, what does this account have inside it that they care about? So if I am in this investigation view, I can now go over and click on accounts and I'll see, okay, this malicious message landed in these two mailboxes. First of all, I know quickly what the status of those messages is, whether they've been read or not, whether they're in the inbox or not. But most importantly, I can see one of these folks was a VIP, and we get that context from the directory. If I go ahead and click on this account, now I'm actually looking at a view all about this account. So not just in email security, but all of the different issues that we know about on this account, and all of the context we can glean from the Google directory or the Microsoft directory. Where it gets really exciting is now I can actually say, well, I'm really curious what this urgent guy does. Like, does he have a lot of important content in their mailbox that would be a great target if this credential theft attack was successful? So with one click, I can actually go now look at what sensitive messages are inside this urgent accounts mailbox. Now, of course, I have to have the right permissions to do this, but I just kind of clicked into this search. And you can see that in this particular instance, again, for demo purposes, there's a bunch of different types of very sensitive content that this account happens to deal with, right? And this is very common. We all know this, but the types of accounts that get the most targeted are folks in finance, folks in HR, folks that are doing basically transactions over email. So this is, where things start getting really interesting, and it goes back to kind of Material's roots. And you'll probably know where I'm going with this, Pat, because you've followed us over the years. But all right, so I have an account. They got a credential phishing attempt. In this case, Material did detect it, but it's not going to detect every single attack. That's just not a realistic expectation. And what we have built in Material from day one is this idea that you have to assume breach. The whole company got started because we saw that when an account gets compromised, there's all these horrible consequences, and everybody's so focused on trying to prevent that event. No one was really thinking about how to minimize the blast radius. And that's really what the kind of origin story of Material is. So if we go back to Urgent, he's got all this sensitive content in his mailbox. What can we do to detect some sort of account compromise scenario? And even better, what can we do to limit the blast radius were one of these account compromises actually successful? So first of all, going back to detections, you'll notice that we have a couple of high severity detections around account compromise. So this is fairly new in Material. What we're doing is we're basically looking at a variety of different signals from the Microsoft APIs, from the Google APIs around behavior. So some of this is as simple as kind of the classic impossible travel type stuff, which in practice is not a good signal in of itself. But if you join that with other things that we're seeing in the mailbox, for example, searches being done, filters being created, old messages being accessed, we can build models that will tell us that an account may be compromised. Now, again, this is best effort, right? We often catch these account compromises, especially if the attacker does something really obvious, like set up a mail filter for all email being hidden to a different folder. But attackers are smart, and it's not always so easy to catch these account compromises. A lot of the industry research shows that the dwell time of an account compromise can be months, and email account takeovers in particular are one of the most prevalent ways that identities are compromised. I was just reading some research from Red Canary about this. The number one identity compromise is an email account compromise because it just has so much data and so many different things you can do with the email account access. So first of all, we try to detect these account takeovers. If we do detect them, you can set us up to revoke the session, reset the password, as you would expect. But where Material really becomes a very, very unique platform is what we do to proactively protect messages, even in the case of account compromise. So in Material, sorry, I'm jumping around here for a second. One of the things that we tell our customers when they first connect us is what types of sensitive content exist inside a mailbox, going all the way back to T0. Even if you have an email retention policy, chances are there's some really sensitive stuff in there because internal communication all lives in email. Obviously, external parties might send you stuff that's really sensitive, and it all just gets archived. It becomes this giant content store. So we'll tell you kind of what types of sensitive content there are. Again, we have a sensitive content classification engine built into the material. We can also leverage a third-party engine if you're already using one. But we'll first go and then analyze what is inside mailboxes, what would actually be at risk if an account compromise were to have happened. Similarly, what apps can I access if I compromise an account? So if I get into an email account, often there are many applications that are using that email account for identity verification. And every single one of those applications is something that I can compromise if I get into that account. We see this very, very often. But for example, something like Slack will send magic sign-in links over email. So you do not need to have the Slack credentials. You don't need to have the SSO credentials. All you need to do is have access to an email account, and you can get into a company Slack in many cases. Often
yeah, and I'm gonna just totally steal your thunder here and explain your party trick, because it's one that I love, which is if you're an attacker that gets into one of these mailboxes and you try to get a smart, like a magic link from Slack or wherever, or even a password reset email, you're the attacker, you're sitting there and you guys rewrite the link and there's an MFA challenge. Or you can't even get the content of that mail, right? And yeah, so as an attacker, you're sitting there just going, draft.
Yeah. So since you stole my thunder, I'm just going to show that really quickly.
So I had to jump in there. I mean, I just as a feature, like it's an absolutely killer feature. I've always loved that one. I just think it's just such a great way to ruin an attacker's day. Because that's the first thing they're going to do is they're going to use that email access to go and compromise everything that is, where the root of trust is that inbox. And just to be able to rain on that parade, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'll tell you one story here. Before this company, as you know, I used to work at Dropbox. And one of the things Dropbox did is if you forgot your password and requested a password reset link, we just assumed you had forgotten if you had forgotten your first factor, you had forgotten your second factor, which means that we did not trigger MFA to reset passwords. Now, you can argue that was a really bad security decision. The reality is, though, the business has to think about, okay, how do I think about the trade-off of like letting users who are locked out back in versus the security risk? And in that case, the growth PM won out over the security PM, I guess. But the point is, I could have just used an email account to reset a password for Dropbox with no additional MFA, even if I have MFA set up on my account, which is a huge. So as you described, what Material can do is put some of these high consequence emails, whether they're password resets, sign up verifications, or straight up sensitive content emails, behind an additional layer of authentication. So I'm just going to show really quickly what we do there. And this is all happening proactively. This is not in response to detecting an account takeover. It's something that we just do if you choose to turn on this protection. I like to say, you don't put on a seatbelt right before you're getting into an accident. You just put it on every time you drive. So you can think of this feature as something where we are just thinking this is best practice, because in the event that there is an account takeover, we've minimized the harm. So in this case, I'm going to show that really quickly by just going to this mailbox. And the key assumption here is that I am not the owner of this mailbox. I have compromised it. How have I done it? It doesn't matter. I could have done a man-in-the-middle attack with MFA compromise. I could have installed a malicious OAuth app or browser extension. I could have done a personal device malware attack. It doesn't matter. Let's just assume that I've compromised this mailbox. What do I actually want? Well, there's a few things I want. One of them being sensitive content that's inside the mailbox. I'm going to do a data dump of this entire mailbox, and then I'm going to go through it at my leisure, and I'm going to, find what I can monetize. What Material does is if a message is sensitive and it's also older than a certain amount of time, which is configurable, what we can do is actually redact the contents via API. And so this is a party trick, like you said, that we invented a long time ago, which was being able to use the APIs to actually mutate the contents of a mailbox. There is no Chrome extension or client-side add-on or anything installed here. I've actually redacted the contents at the message mailbox level, which means that it's not even in Google anymore. It's stored back in that single tenant instance that we talked about at the very beginning of the call. If I'm a user that is the true account holder or the attacker that really wants this message, what I have to do is I have to actually pass a challenge to prove that I have have authorized access to this message. And what I do that by pressing this retrieve button, at which point Material gets a chance to challenge me on a side challenge that is different from something that is protecting the mailbox. It could be an IDP. It could be a different factor like a YubiKey. It could be a trusted IP. The point is that it is a challenge that might be easy for an attacker or a user to pass, but hard for an attacker to pass. When I pass that challenge, as you just saw, I just get the message right back in my mailbox. It is literally available to me.
And you're rewriting that in via the Google API, right? And I mean, I just dig this, right? I dig it. I misspoke earlier when I said you're rewriting the links. You're not rewriting the links. You're redacting the whole message. One question one question, excuse me. One question I do have though is, does this redaction make searching for historical mail? I imagine that makes that a little bit challenging though. Like if you're looking for an old email that's been redacted in this way, it's not going to show up in search. I'm just thinking that might be one possible small downside here.
No, it's a great question. You're exactly right. Because we're removing the message from Gmail altogether or Outlook, it's literally not in the search index anymore. But you'll notice that when we redact these messages, we're pretty clever about it. We leave a lot of metadata that is still in the search index. So things like the subject, things like the sender, the recipients, the date, even the names of attachments, even though they're hollow attachments, we preserve the names. And so what we have noticed in practice is that most of the things that people actually search on, we are able to leave. Now, if you literally wanted to search for your social security number and have it pull up the message, it's not going to work because we have redacted that content. But as you saw, if I pass that challenge, I can get this right back. Now, in practice, what customers do is they'll set up things like a custom device policy or access policy in Okta that is stricter than what you're using to log into Google or Gmail in the first place. So for example, maybe I want to let people use Gmail on their phone because that is totally normal and you want people to access their work email. But just because they can access their work email on their phone, should they be able to access a board deck from 6 years ago on their phone? Probably not. You might want to actually enforce a different control there. And so you basically, this layer of abstraction basically gives you this granular control over sensitive content access. The thing that's new is that because Material is a detection and response platform, obviously these retrievals also lead us to have different signals for detection. So now, what if I'm an account that has a lot of these failed message retrievals in a short time span? Well, turns out that's a really, really good canary, right?
That is someone searching. That is a compromised mailbox. Someone searching, trying to do some damage. You get 5 of them in a row. You know something's up at that point. That's a great signal.
And you can do all this sort of playbooks downstream of this because everything I've been showing in the product is an events API or a REST API accessible thing. So we don't care if you ever log into our console. Everything in the console is available via API, and many teams will just pipe all of this information to wherever they do their orchestration or their detection engineering. And these just become things that are useful for not just adversary, but also things like an insider, right? So if I have someone on their way out of the organization in their last couple of weeks, they might be trying to walk with a bunch of data. So, a lot of stuff to show here. You can see that kind of the breadth, right? So we're looking at everything from helping you in the first place with the vulnerabilities and the posture to looking at actual threats that may be coming in and trying to block whatever we can. And then we have a plan for things like account takeovers, if we do miss them, to protect the actual content and the lateral movement that can occur from a mailbox. So it's a pretty complete suite. It doesn't apply just to email. A lot of what I've showed today is also around files. And that's kind of really the vision, which is, can we give you one security platform to do everything you really need to do with M365 and G Suite or Google Workspace? As they call it these days.
Well, I mean, I think they should have these features by default, right? Like, and that's often what happens with security products, right? Is people building things the vendors themselves should have built. It's kind of a bit weird, really, that they don't have this, to be honest.
I think that's the most ironic thing about everything in the security industry, right? By definition, every product is securing some platform that has its own native security. So it can always be said that why doesn't the native thing just do this? And I think we all know the answer. It takes kind of focus and depth, which is not always the highest priority for the platforms.
Well, and they're trying to do something at scale, right?
Yes.
For all business, not necessarily just businesses that do have security teams and do want to spend that extra money and for whom it's important. That's a small subset of their customers. People forget that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And certainly what we hear from customers all the time, which is like, yeah, I could have gotten all this data from Google or Microsoft. I would have had to navigate 7 different consoles, 5 different APIs. I would have had to, often security teams don't even have the access to those consoles because they require super admin privileges, which are too much to grant to every single person on the security team. So they're then at the behest of, other folks in the organization that they have to work through. Because Material is doing a one-time domain-wide delegation and then has our own roles-based access controls, you can actually get a lot of the information that you wouldn't be able to get in the native consoles.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. Abhishek Agrawal, thank you so much for joining me to walk me through Materials platform, which is, it's got a lot more stuff in it than the last time we did this, which was years ago. That was a great walkthrough. Appreciate your time.
Yes. Thank you so much, Pat.